before, and I know there are some people tuning in for the first time tonight, we are looking at the book of Job. I will send you the written materials I have sent out already. One is an overview of the wisdom books of Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes, which is a unique tradition in the Bible. 300-400 BC, a group of Hellenistically educated Jewish professors decided to seek for wisdom in a new way, instead of relying on revelation that God in the Torah revealed, tradition says on Sinai, had told us all truth, and all we had to do is figure out what was in there. They said no. As a matter of fact, they didn't even say no. They ignored the tradition in Judaism of revelation and acted as if it had never happened. And Mount Sinai, it had never happened. And nobody knew anything. And we had to figure out, using our wisdom, no doubt God-given wisdom, but we had to figure out what wisdom was. So the answer didn't come from God this way to us, as in Revelation, but through our reason, we were going to get to what the meaning of life was. I mean, why have wisdom about anything else? I mean, you can have wisdom about how to cook cauliflower, but wisdom should be used, I think, for first order questions. What are we doing here? What ought I to be doing right now, today, tomorrow, next week? What kind of a life should I be living? Are there rules I should be following? Is there a way that I could know where I came from, or what the nature of the universe is? And God? Is God divine mind that runs the world? Is there emotion in God? Is God close? Is God far? And what does this have to do with me? Is God within me? There you are, not only close, but actually Meister Eckhart, the great 14th century Christian mystic, said, God is closer to me than I am to myself. He's my true self. My ego is a false self. My true self is God. I and God, we are one. That's true mysticism, in which you don't just relate to God, as in most religions, you melt together with God. God and I, we are one. And that is the mystical tradition, which is very, very rich. And it's implied in much exoteric religion, that is regular, everyday religion, which tries to get us into the proper relationship with God. But it is stated clearly that it's not a matter, in mysticism, not a matter of relationship. It's a matter of becoming one with God and discovering that the little castle in the self, as Meister Eckhart says, is God within us. It's the God within that counts. He has to penetrate us. And that's the mystical. That's why when Saint Teresa of Avila was speaking of this, you couldn't tell whether she was talking about some kind of sexual ecstasy or religious ecstasy. She's so in love with God that there is a penetration using all kind of imagery for sexual intercourse. And that comes out too in Judaism, in the Chododi that we sing on Friday night when we welcome the Sabbath bride. There are all kinds of things in there which are quite risque. It's really talking about an act of love between Israel and the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the bride, and we are the husband. And Friday night, of course, even though especially among the Orthodox, intimacy between husband and wife, when you get after the Sabbath dinner and all that, that is considered virtually mandatory, because that's the way you act out the love for each other that God showed when he created the world, his love for us. Well, we've done the first chapter of Job, and that is a scene. Well, there are two aspects to it. First of all, we're talking about how Job was a very wealthy farmer, maybe a king, but certainly a very important man who lived in the East. He's not an Israelite. Lived in the East. And he had everything. And then everything was taken away. Now, of the many theories of where this book came from, I've been presenting just one. It's one of many. It seems to me, and I must say my thinking has evolved a little bit as I've taught this course. And I think that's a good thing, because we really don't know the answers to who wrote this or that in the scriptures. All we have is theories. Theories about theories. The stories themselves are theories about human life. That's what these Bible stories are. They're mythos, stories. And our interpretations of them are also mythos. We, in our interpretation of who wrote it and when was it written, we use evidence here and evidence there, and we sometimes use this, but cut this out because it doesn't fit our tendentious purposes. We want to end with what we want to end with, so you only look at these verses or those verses. And that's not legitimate scholarship, but it happens all the time. If you look at everything, you end up, you don't really know. And I think that's the answer. We're constantly looking for when was this written, where was it written, what's the point of view to it, which audience it was written to, but we're not sure. And I think we'll go on searching, which is what makes it so exciting. So my initial theory, and it's just one, I didn't invent it, it's just one of many, is that here we have a short story about an ancient ruler, an ancient patriarch, and the way he does things sounds like sometime around 2000 BCE. There's no priesthood, there's no temple. He offers sacrifice for his whole family. He sacrifices animals. And the traditions are of a kind of nomadic chieftain, or one who has just recently settled down to own land. And there are always nomads coming at him, attacking him. And this is typical of about 2000 BC. So the origins of this book may be a short, very short story, a novella, about this Eastern ruler or patriarch who had everything. The capricious gods got together and took everything away, and then he got everything back. The end. Without any moral or ethical considerations, because you didn't have that in most of those religions. And then around 300 BC, a Jewish writer or editor got hold of this. He took this story and he cut it in half. So you have a prologue and an epilogue. The guy loses everything, the guy gets everything back. And then he dropped into the middle 30 chapters of a dialogue between Job, the person in question, Eob, and which is an ancient name, and three friends of his who are saying, well, if you lost everything, you must be guilty of some sin. And he says, no, I'm a righteous man. And we know from the prologue, which has been heavily edited by the Hebrew editor, so heavily that I'm beginning to think that the idea of this story might be 2000 BC. But with all of this Jewish interpretation, the Jewish name for God, YHWH, the unpronounceable name, so holy we don't say it. We say Adonai instead, but that's not the name. The Jewish name for God that only the Jews felt they knew is in this prologue. It's not in the body of the work. So the theory that the body of the work was dropped in and written by one Jewish writer and editor, but because he cut in half the original story, which was a pagan story, then why does the particularly Jewish name for God not appear in the 30 chapters written by the Jewish author? We have El or Elohim. These are generic terms. The Canaanites called their God El. The Jews just picked it up. We say El Shaddai, God, the infinite one. That's one of our names for God. Elohim, we say that frequently in our prayers. But the personal name, which is translated or mistranslated Adonai or the Lord, that is unique to the Jews. They felt they knew the personal name of God, like John or Harry or Bob, and he had revealed it to Moses on Mount Sinai. And there's another tradition that they knew it earlier, even before the flood. But when it was revealed, we don't know. But why would that name appear in the prologue, which we say is a pagan story, but not in the body of the text? It would mean that the Jewish editor edited the hell out of that prologue. So the only thing left of it, unless the Jewish writer actually wrote it and placed it in an ancient period. Now, the book of Ruth is written by a Jewish writer. And it says it begins in the time when the judges ruled. So in the traditional Bible, you'll find the book of Ruth right after the book of Judges. But it's written much later. It's written not long before the wisdom literature is written. It's a very late book. For many reasons, we conclude that. But again, it's just a theory. But it's placed back in the time of the judges. Doesn't mean it was written in the time of the judges. This is placed back in the time of 800 years before the Israelites really emerged in the hills of Canaan and became a people about 1200 BC, various groups coming together. So it's placed in 2000 BC. Does that mean it really, the original story was written that early? I don't know anymore. Job is referred to in Ezekiel and elsewhere in the Bible as an ancient character. And this story, the theme of the story, certainly goes back all those years. But did the Jewish author and editor just pick up the theme and take some small shards, just a few sentences here and there? After all, the prologue and epilogue it's just like 3 chapters. I don't know anymore. The more I look at this, the more mysterious it becomes. So we'll just stop looking at it and just jump to conclusion that we can't do that. So we struggle on. And I have the text here. And the first 2 chapters, I'm already at the 3rd, but we're starting here at the 2nd. The first chapter is we have Job is a man who is a wealthy and good man, and it tells us all the great stuff he had on earth, all his treasure and his land and his children. Then the scene goes to heaven, and we see an assembly of which originally was of the gods, but this is of God and his godlike underlings. So if you look at the Mesopotamian and Babylonian hierarchy, you find Marduk, the sun god, and all the lesser gods, and they get together once a year for a 10-day New Year festival. Sounds familiar? The Jews have a 10-day New Year festival and took it directly, I believe, from the Babylonians. But theirs was in the spring and ours is in the fall. But those are the times of change. That's when things are a little unstable and you want reassurance about God that he's taking care of the world. So we talk about enthroning God on Rosh Hashanah, and that is one assembly. And perhaps as some early Jewish translators or paraphrasers of the Bible into Aramaic, and that's called the Targum, they said that the first meeting in chapter 1 was Rosh Hashanah. Well, it's possible because we're going to have a next one very soon. So maybe that's Yom Kippur. It's conceivable. I was going to read you some of the Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah prayer book to indicate, to stress that possibility, but I don't have it in front of me. I'm not going to get up and start searching for it in my drawer now. Perhaps next week. But this is an interesting theory. So then after we're told how Job is a great guy, we are told that there was a meeting in heaven between gods and the sons, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of the gods. And these would be the other angelic beings or divine beings in God's court. The modern Jews don't think too much about that, but in those days that was important. He had agents, his angels. And we welcome them on Sabbath evening, don't we, when we light Sabbath candles? Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet. Come in peace, angels of peace. And we wave arms around the lady of the house. And you welcome, you feel the angels coming to protect you over the Sabbath. It's a beautiful moment, the lighting of those candles and the singing of that song. You know, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. from angels from the King of Kings. May he come and bless us on the Sabbath. You feel enveloped by their wings. If you really get into it. Wonderful imagery. So we do believe in angels, and they're part of Judaism. I can't tell an individual what to believe in. I didn't believe in angels. Students would always ask me, you're teaching all these religion courses. Do you believe in God? I wouldn't answer in class. But if they came to my office, I would answer, I do, because I've experienced God in my own life. You can argue God one way or the other. I could give you arguments that couldn't prove God didn't exist, but arguments that couldn't prove God existed. You can't quite get there, but there are logical arguments, some of them very good. Look at Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways of doing it. The third way, I think, is very impressive. People have been trying to prove God, but of course we really can't. So my religion is based upon personal experience of God in my own life. But then they would ask me, do you believe in angels? And I would say, the only answer I can give you is I have not experienced angels. I don't know if they're angels or not, but I haven't had the experience. But then I did have the experience. And it could have been a hallucination. I could have fallen asleep in the church pew. Any number of things could have happened. But I had a vision of angels, which is quite unlike anything I've ever had in my life. The conditions were right. The organ was playing. There was a lot of incense. It was hot. It was 4 p.m. I thought, well, maybe it was low blood sugar. But then I said, well, maybe it was angels. As a modern person, I can't say it was, but I say that's a possibility. So rather than go with low blood sugar, I'll go with that one. I prefer it. And so if people ask me if I believe in angels, I said, sure, because I've experienced them. You can't say you believe in God or you don't believe in God. All you can say is I've had the experience that I interpret as the presence of God, or I haven't had the experience. And someone who hasn't had the experience might try to argue with a man. Let's look about love. Suppose the guy falls in love, and his best friend who's never fallen in love says, you're crazy. That's not the girl for you, blah, blah, blah. And the other one says, but I love her. What are you talking about, love? It's some, glandular thing. Oh, no, I love her. And I don't know what you're talking. And yes, he doesn't know what you're talking about. Trying to describe the experience of God to someone who hasn't had it is like trying to describe the color green to a blind person. I know that's a prejudicial example. But it is trying to describe a crucial experience to person A, which person B just has never had anything like it. So of course he can't understand it, but he has no right to discount it. So it's a matter of, have I had that experience or have I not had that experience? Right? That's a rather Protestant approach to things. I don't believe you can take anybody's word for anything. You can't take the Torah's word or Moses' words or the rabbi's words or the priest's words. You have to have the experience. And that is, I sound like a Methodist, I know, but personal experience is very important in all our lives, but I would say in my religious life, certainly. All right, but let's go on. We learn God and the sons of God come together in a meeting. Is it an annual meeting? Is it Rosh Hashanah? We don't know. And the Satan, Ha-Satan, the opponent, the cosmic gadfly, not evil. He's just a Dickens, not little Dickens, but a big Dickens because he's an angel. But he is God's spy. He roams over the earth. He's the eyes and ears of God. And he comes back together with all the others, the sons of God, the lesser divinities. And he reports on the earth. And God says, have you considered my servant Job? He's the most righteous man in the world. And Satan says, oh, he's only righteous because you give him good stuff. Take that away and he'll curse you, not bless you. God says, okay, I take the bet. And Job is afflicted. All of his children are killed. His property gone. Everything gone except his wife. But his wife turns out to be such a nag that Maimonides said God left Job his wife to increase his torment. And from the one line she has here, that would indicate he's married to the wrong woman. And that's as far as we got. he is suffering, but he doesn't curse God. He says God has given in the question of his children who are dead. God has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. That's not so easy to say in such circumstances, but he does. And now, the second chapter, we have the second heavenly assembly. Is it a year later? Is this an annual thing? Or is it 10 days later in our earthly reckoning? Is it Yom Kippur? And there is a close connection. On Rosh Hashanah, the decree is inscribed on what will happen to us for the next year. But on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. We have 10 days to change God's mind if we think the decree is for something bad because of our sins. So we have 10 days to repent the sins, the days of all. They should be used well, to apologize to anyone you've hurt, to try to undo any misdeed. And then we can go before God on Yom Kippur and ask him for forgiveness, but only after we've asked our fellow humans for forgiveness for what we've done to them. Serious business. And the inscription is made on Rosh Hashanah, but the seal can be changed. We can appeal to God, actually, to change his mind if we convince him that we want to live in newness of life, in a new way, and try to overcome the sins of the last year. Might take a lot of convincing, but that's why we spent all day in the synagogue. Chapter 2. So I've tried to bring everybody up to date. The second heavenly meeting. So the scene is in heaven. The day arrived, this is chapter 2, verse 1. Follow along if you like. The day arrived when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Now, God is Elim, the B'nai Elim, the sons of God. And at the end of the sentence, they came before the Lord. The Lord is that Yud Hey Vav Hey YHWH. People had a W in those days, which I won't pronounce, but some of you know what it says. In the text I'm reading, it spells out the name, but I followed the old taboo. I'm not going to pronounce the name of this holiness. Came to present themselves before the Lord. And Hasatan, the Satan, there's a definite article in the Hebrew before it. It's not a name yet. It means the opponent. That's what the Satan means. And I explained earlier that probably taken from Persian mythology during the time when Persia ruled the Middle East. And the Jews picked this up as an explanation for evil in the world. They came to present themselves before the Lord. And the Satan also came with them to present himself before. He's part of the heavenly court before the Lord. Said the Lord to the Satan, where did you come from? Exact formulaic exchange that they have in the first chapter. And the Satan answered the Lord, oh, from roaming the earth and strolling about on it. He's God's spy. That's his job. And the Lord says to Satan once again, have you marked my servant Job? There is none like him in all the earth, a blameless and upright man. God knows that Job is the most righteous of men. He still holds fast to his integrity, meaning even though you killed his children, even though you took his land, even though you stripped him of everything, he still will not turn on me. He says, the Lord gave, the Lord takes away. Can we expect good things from the Lord and not expect bad things? God is the source of everything. Now, Judaism at this point is in the process of saying, no, God isn't the source of evil that comes on you. First of all, your misuse of your free will is much of it. But maybe there's a cosmic force in opposition to God, Ha-Satan. So they're developing this satanic being. And this is the early years of it, about 300 BC. But by the time you get to the New Testament, Jesus and the Pharisees, the proto-rabbinic movement, they all believe in Satan as a very important force. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke, he's the one who enters into Judas Iscariot and causes him to betray Jesus. He still holds fast to his integrity despite all the torments. I put him into your hand. And you wiped out all his property and his family. And you said he turned on me and cursed me, but he hasn't. He still blesses my name. He holds fast to his integrity. And though you incited me against him to destroy him without cause, God realizes that he let the Satan attack Job with no cause whatsoever. Now, as I've said, there are two ways that I figure you can interpret this. I'm sure there are many more, but this is just what I've thought of. If you want to put a negative spin on this, God, the God of Job, now this is not the God of the rest of the Bible. Remember, this is the Minority Report. These 3 books of Dissent that I'm teaching because of their interest. They don't agree with the rest of the Bible. Where God, all through the destruction of Jerusalem in the book of Lamentations, one of the most depressing and horrifying books I've ever read, and that we chant on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the anniversary of the destruction of Jerusalem in the summer. An awful holiday, but we have to remember the dead. Al Tishkach is the motto of our faith. Don't forget, never forget. And the martyrs must be honored no matter how painful it is to read about their horrible death as Jerusalem was surrounded and starved out and then leveled by the Babylonians and then the Romans later on. But we never, that author, conceivably Jeremiah, who may have been a witness, never blames God. The sin is ours, he says. You are holy and pure, al kisei rachamim, on the throne of mercy. Mercy, look what he sees before him, but he blames the people for their sinfulness, never God. And that is the pattern in the Bible, always getting God off the hook for suffering. It's our fault. The Jews are the most self-blaming people in the world. And that's not so hard, of course, if we're looking back on something that happened 2,000 years ago. Dealing with the Holocaust is something else. It's much too recent. The pain is too raw. Nobody would dare. Well, some have. Some Orthodox Jews have blamed the Jewish people for it. But that has been generally repudiated. Richard Rubinstein, an interesting theologian, several decades ago, wrote a book called After Auschwitz. And the first chapter of it is a work of genius. And it's part of the Death of God movement that was very big in those days, which means many things, doesn't necessarily mean what the words mean. There are many ways in which God can be eclipsed in the modern world. But Rubinstein's take on it is very original and creative. Can we believe in God after Auschwitz? If so, what kind of a God? So God does, according to the Hebrew tradition, God, which Jesus articulates, not a sparrow falls, as one of our students has written to me this week, without God noticing it. He counts every hair on our head. God does care desperately about the suffering of every human being. But what can he do about it? If he intervenes to keep that car from hitting that other car and killing that innocent person, Maimonides says he can't do that. He has set up rules in the universe, and you have to learn the rules. And if there's somebody who is acting in a way that flouts the rules, an innocent person can be destroyed because of that. There is no God who's going to hold up his hand and say, stop, magically. It doesn't mean he doesn't feel the pain, but it means he has to let things happen because he gave us free will. And if he intervened constantly in the individual's life, free will would be a fraud. And that would be magic, not religion, which these two are often confused. And yet I pray for the health of my friends. I wrestle in prayer for them more than for myself, as is proper. You desperately want your dear friends to survive and to be with you. And for their own sake, they deserve to live. They're good people. And I appeal, this is a very good human being, God. Don't Don't take him. Don't take her. We need that person here. Do I really expect him to respond? Yeah, he could if he wanted to. But most of the time, all he does is offer comfort and the sense of his presence and the sense that he suffers with us. That's in Jeremiah. With the pain of my people, I feel pain. And he says, God is speaking is through the prophet. Would that I could get a little cabin out in the wilderness and leave Jerusalem and not see the horrors going on there. But I can't, because this is where I live. The Jerusalemites live here, but I live here in the temple. This is my home. Or in the hearts of my people, as Jeremiah would say. I can't leave them. I love them. I can't leave them. So he feels the pain, but that doesn't mean he intervenes magically. And that's a very hard lesson to learn. And still we appeal to God to do that. I once went into a chapel in a hospital. The chairman of my department was having a heart attack. It was in progress. I threw myself at that altar. I said, God, don't take him. Stop it. I call on you for a miracle. Didn't happen. But somehow the comfort of the connection builds a sense of faith in God. Even if we don't get the answer we want, even if we know it's folly to ask, it's right that we ask because we love people and we want them to be around forever. And of course, we who do the praying will pass too, and people will go in the chapel and pray for us. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. Somebody said sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't. And so I think God really is deeply pleased when he sees us pleading for our fellow human beings. But his is an eternal perspective. And he feels for us. But to intervene, well, that would make free will a farce. And free will is the basis of all moral and ethical life. All right. So have you marked Job? He still holds fast to his integrity. So there are two ways to interpret it. One, that this is a capricious God, or worse, a sadistic God. He knows God, that Job is righteous. And he's punished. He's letting the most righteous man on earth be punished. But this isn't new. It's true that in the book of Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic tradition, the good get good stuff and the bad get bad stuff. And that's said over and over. It's one of the pillars of the book of Deuteronomy, which is attributed to Moses, but was actually probably written about 600 something BC, 650 BC would be a good estimate, by priests either in Jerusalem or Shiloh, giving their perspective and then attributing it to Moses. Orthodox Jews, of course, believe all 5 books of the Torah written by Moses, including Deuteronomy. It is a collection of speeches allegedly by Moses. The question is who really wrote them. But the whole Deuteronomic point, one of the great 3 points of the book is, if then, the consequentialist theory of history, and the good get good and the bad get punished, and you reap the whirlwind and all that. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever you sow, that you shall surely reap. Well, then why do the wicked prosper so often, and why do the good suffer? And Jeremiah says, God, why do the good suffer? Why do the wicked prosper? Why? The man is crying out in agony, and there's no answer. Because God just doesn't manipulate everything. He has to let people do their thing. And if it's an evil thing, there was an article in Commentary magazine years ago, no Hitler, no Holocaust. This was the insane idea of one man. Yes, there had been terrible anti-Semitism in Christian Europe. And even before that, in Alexandria, the first pogrom, before Christianity. The Jews were hated for many reasons, mainly jealousy, the idea they controlled everything, or they had superior qualities, and people don't like that. Jealousy may be the most, and resentment, some of the most powerful emotions, but for whatever reasons. But it never would have come to that if this one man hadn't somehow seduced the whole nation and then brought out the demons in the people in Eastern Europe to cooperate with this. No Hitler, no Holocaust. I think it's a pretty good thesis. But here we have the suffering of the innocent. And I said, God said to Abraham, if you team up with me, your people are going to suffer periodically. That's the deal. So the Jews don't suffer because sometimes the prophets say they suffer because they become idolatrous and unethical and God punishes the wicked. Other times, it's just part of the covenant, the deal, that when evil people come to power, God doesn't cause holocausts, but when Hitler comes to power, he looks at a people who are trying to pursue righteousness and are close to God and claim to be the chosen people of God. I think Hitler believed that. I think there are two elements that believed it. The Jews believed it, and Hitler believed it. Why else would you think that the Jews had this cosmic power of evil and controlled everything? He wanted to hit at the Christian God. And the Christian God who says, be kind, be compassionate, protect the weak and the helpless. Hitler had the exact opposite view. He turned Western morality on its head. And to do that, you have to overcome Christianity. But Christianity is the outreach of Judaism into the world. So he goes after he couldn't go after Jesus by name, because he'd lose his constituency. But he goes after the Jews, the people of Jesus. If you can't hit at Jesus directly, you hit at the people who are in the world to espouse his principles and who uphold this ancient idea of righteousness, which Hitler thought was effeminate weakness, and have imposed. It's funny, Christians said the Jews killed Jesus, and Hitler said the Jews imposed this effeminate carpenter on Nordic manhood and destroyed it. Christianity is a Jewish plot and an imposition on the world. So he goes after the source, the people who are the representatives of God. And that God predicted all that to Abraham. You team up with me, this is what's going to happen. I don't make Holocausts happen, but they're going to happen because the evil ones always go after the ones who are preaching good. So God this isn't new in Job that the righteous suffer. It's an essential element in the Bible. But Deuteronomy, which everybody would prefer to believe, the righteous prosper and the wicked suffer, that's become the simple-minded surface view. But right underneath, throughout the Torah and elsewhere, you have the suffering. The prophets suffered. They all were rejected. Nobody paid any attention to any of them, except Jonah, who's a fictional prophet, and who paid attention? The Assyrians, not the Jews. It's like Mahatma Gandhi. Did the Indians pay any attention to him? No, there was a bloody civil war when the nation split. Broke his heart. Who paid attention? The British. They got out of India. So the Jews didn't pay any attention to the problem. We have them today and we read them. Do we pay any attention? It has been told thee, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of thee? But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. We know what we're supposed to do. Do we do it? Huh. So the suffering of the innocent is an old theme. It just comes to a point in Job. It is the whole point of Job. Is God capricious or even sadistic? Some people have said the God of Job is, because he knows he's punishing a righteous man and he singles him out. He singles him out for righteousness, and Satan says, well, then let me torment him. And God says, he'll still love me. So sure, take him, do what you want. Capricious, if not sadistic. But the other side, you want to have a positive spin on this, and I'm not recommending either one. God wants to know a crucial question. The question that Paul gave a negative answer to. People are evil, said Paul. There are no right. The question of the suffering of the righteous had no meaning to Paul in the New Testament because there are no righteous. And that's he may be making an interesting point. Who are the righteous? I was in a church with a black preacher, a wonderful, eloquent preacher. And the black people have some of the greatest speakers, of course, in their churches. And we were singing a hymn. And behind the great unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch upon his own. Oh, what a comforting hymn everybody was. And so the guy leaned over to me and said, but it depends on who his own may be. We don't know. And that's a very good question. Of course, the people who sing the hymn think they're his own. We're his own. Oh, he's keeping watch over it. But this fellow saying, well, maybe these people in church, they make assumptions about their own righteousness. Maybe we don't know who God's own are. And it's a good question. So God wants to know here, would people be righteous if there were no reward connected to it? The Satan may have a point. Job has been rewarded for all his righteousness. Did he believe that if he was righteous, he'd get all that stuff? Maybe. Well, is that really righteousness if we do the good to get a present, a prize in this life or the next? Isn't that selfishness? I'll do what's required. It's like, let's see, I won't say a name, but there was a very famous woman who wanted to spite the family of her first husband who had been assassinated. And so she married a great billionaire. And it was apparent she didn't love him. She married him to become one of the richest women in the world and thumb her nose at her former family, who was rich, but not that rich. So to get married, whether you pretend love or not, to get a fortune, well, the marriage is a dubious alliance. To be righteous because you know that either in this world or the next, or you believe that you're going to get something here or in heaven, the golden fig Newton in heaven. Well, is that righteousness? Seems to me that's just greed. But that's the question. If you take away all the rewards, will Job still be a good man? And that's a valid question. It may be a cruel experiment. Did Job deserve it? No. But maybe God just had to know. And in the end, he does restore everything. But he puts Job through the ringer. So maybe it's a good question. All right. So that's two ways to look at this whole experiment. So he still holds fast to his integrity. Integrity is a very important thing here. Verse 3. Though you, Satan, incited me against him to destroy him without cause. God knows he's righteous. Chapter 4, verse 4. Satan answered the Lord, skin after skin. This is a very interesting metaphor, which appears only here. And that's what it says in the Hebrew, skin after skin or skin for skin. It probably means value for value. A response is equal to the prior action. Probably means Job's response, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. You can understand it because, of course, you didn't hurt Job himself. You just took everything he had away, and everyone except his wife. So if you let me do more, then he'll reject you, God. You just haven't done enough to him. Skin for skin, value for value. That's one theory of what this means. Since it's unknown anywhere else, we just have to figure out what it means. It's obviously some kind of a popular saying at some point. But now he explains it. All that a man has, he will give for his life. Including, I think, his love for God. if you threaten his life, and then he will curse God. You haven't threatened his life, God. You haven't gone far enough. Threaten his life, and make his life a misery and a nightmare, and then he will curse you rather than bless you. And by the way, in the Hebrew, the word bracha or baruch can mean blessing or curse. I mean, this is why Hebrew is so maddening. It depends on the context. There are some old translations of this book in which Job's wife says, bless God and die. When it should mean curse God and die, but it's the same word. Literally, it says bless. But by some twisted etymology, it can also mean curse. A word can mean its opposite, and you have to know how to use it. Yeah, from the context, the past and the future. The Song of Moses says, then sang Moses to the Lord, but it could also mean then Moses will sing to the Lord, or Moses did sing, past and future. Or something can mean it will happen, or may it happen. I hope it'll happen. Same words, you got to figure it out from the context. The Lord will redeem us, or may the Lord redeem us. It's difficult. On the surface, Hebrew looks easy, it's phonetically pronounced and all, but some of those words, baby, especially in this book. So the Satan answered, all that the man has he'll give for his life. Reach out and strike him, his body, touch his bone and flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And he spits it out. He says in the Hebrew, to your face, he will spit his curses. It's really a challenge. He gets away with a lot with God. The Lord is very tolerant of the Satan. Well, he put him there to be a gadfly, so when he is, he can't punish him. And the Lord said to the Satan, I'll take the bet. Here, he is in your power, not just his children and not just his property and not just everything. He is in your power. Only don't kill him. You can't kill him, but you can torment his body, and which adds up to a tormenting of the mind. All right, the end of the heavenly scene. Satan now has permission to take the next step. The Satan went out from the Lord's presence. We're back to earth now. And afflicted Job with a foul pox. I would say the literal meaning of the Hebrew is boils. Some people have argued leprosy, but probably boils from head to toe. That would be not leprosy, but certainly no pleasure. I mean, horrible, horrible. From foot to head. He took a broken off piece of pottery and to scrape himself. You always want to scratch those things. The doctors say don't do it, but you do it. And he sat in the ashes. It's like mourning. He's in a state of mourning. That was part of Shiva in the ancient days. You put ashes on your head or throw them up in the air to show extreme distress. You have that in several scenes in the Old and New Testament. Crowds of people hysterical, throwing dust up in the air. And he sat in the ashes. And his wife said to him, the most unhelpful wife in the Bible, do you still maintain your integrity? You're still going to stick with that God of yours? Curse God and die. Not very helpful. And that's all we hear from her, but she's hardly a help in the situation. And Job said to her, you talk like a foolish woman. Now, this is a very traditional role for women in the wisdom literature, I'm sorry to say, the woman as temptress. And throughout the Bible, it's written by men, of course. We have Delilah, who tempts Samson. The guy's a fool, but he falls for her. I mean, shows how stupid he is. He falls for her tricks over and over, the same trick, and finally he falls for it because he likes her. All the judges weren't wise. He's a very stupid boy with girl crazy. Delilah. And then in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, stay away from that bad woman, young man. Oh, those bad women, they'll ruin your life. It never says find the right woman and it'll make your life, but no, they're bad. They're temptresses. Jezebel, Ahab's queen, a name that will live in infamy. The great movie with Bette Davis called Jezebel, a wicked woman that God was an abomination in the sight of the Lord. And nobody could play it like Betty. And then what others, I wonder? Jezebel, Delilah. The woman is temptress throughout the wisdom literature, except the Song of Songs, where the woman, she's the joy of the boy's life. There you have a book. And you have more things said in that book by the girl than by the boy. And feminist authors have written some very interesting commentaries about how seriously the Song of Songs takes the point of view of the woman and presents it. But that's the exception, unfortunately. So, curse God and die. So she's tempting him to turn on God, which would be disastrous. Verse 10, and Job said to her, you talk like a fool. Shall we accept good from God and not accept evil? Now that's a very interesting question. We accept our life from God. It's a gift. Did I deserve to be born? Well, if my life were miserable, I might say like Jeremiah, and Job will say in the next chapter, I didn't deserve this miserable life, but I've had a marvelous life. And did I deserve it? All the happiness I get out of life from teaching, from having loving friends and loving them and interacting and having a social life and all, and projects and political causes and going to churches and synagogues. I miss that so much. Some of you know what I mean. I didn't realize when I was going to the temple every Friday night and the synagogue every Saturday morning, I didn't realize what it would be to miss that for 2 months, 3 months, and God knows how many months to come. I love liturgy. And the hymnal of the Episcopal Church is one of the great works. And to sing those chants in the synagogue, 1,000, 2,000-year-old chants, to be one with one's people and one's God, what a privilege. How do you do that on your own? You try, you say prayers, you light candles, etc. It's not the same. So may God grant that we can all get back to these things as soon as possible. Shall we accept good from God and not accept evil? Do I have a right to expect only good things will happen to me? No. You got to accept the evil with the good. Unless you believe that life is some kind of a fantasy of nothing but nice things. God ain't Mary Poppins. In spite of all this, Job did not sin with his lips. He's in agony, covered with boils from head to foot. Every inch of his skin, a tormenting pain. And he doesn't denounce God. I accepted all that good. Now evil has come in its season. What can I do but accept it? Will screaming and yelling about it change it? My grandmother knew that. If she thought, my brother's hopefully listening tonight, if she thought she could change something, she would raise heaven and hell, screaming, carrying on, until she got her way. She had a whim of iron. And she was a matriarch who dominated 3 generations, the power of her will. But if she knew she couldn't change it, she would sit in total silence while everyone yelled and screamed around her, trying to change the unchangeable. I've seen people, I was driving the car, and my mother and my aunt, and the traffic was so terrible, and they were just going berserk. And my mother said, why did you take 10th Avenue? Nobody takes 10th Avenue. I said, nobody takes 10th Avenue? Then why are there 100,000 cars there? Obviously, everybody made the same mistake I did. But my grandmother just sat there serene. You can't change the traffic. Why get upset about it? Very wise woman in many ways. She knew when to get upset and when not to. He didn't sin with his lips. What am I going to do about it? Why get hysterical? Verse 11. Now come the three friends, or the three neighbors, or the three counselors. And they are interesting characters. They are going to argue for the traditional view. Job, if you're suffering, you must have sinned. No, I haven't. I followed everything that the law tells me to do. No, you must have sinned without realizing it. Go over everything. Confess your sins. Repent. I can't repent what I didn't do. That's going to be the argument. They represent the traditional if-then theology. You don't suffer if you don't deserve it. Well, Job knows better. And he sticks to his integrity. And that's the next 30 chapters. And we're not going to read every line because there's a lot of repetition, but we will go through the powerful initial arguments and then pass on to the end. Job's three friends heard of the calamity that had befallen him in verse 11. And they came each from his place. Now, the text has already told us Job is certainly not an Israelite, even though this has been heavily edited and largely the central chapter is written by an Israelite writer. So by that time, they were calling themselves Jews. I can say Jewish. First, they were Hebrews, then Israelites, then Jews. Jew is just means a Judean, somebody who comes from Judea, although many of us today are not originally Judeans, but descendants of northern Israelites who fled south in 722 BCE when the Assyrians overran northern Israel. They fled south, the 10 tribes, many of them, and became absorbed into Judah. So they're all called Jews or Judeans now, but it's not necessarily correct. You could be of the tribe of this or the tribe of that, or descended from people who converted in the Middle Ages. Who knows where we came from? I know I'm a Judean because I'm a Kohan, and that's where the high priests were. When Job's three friends, but Job is not. Job is an Eastern patriarch. And so he's not in Israel. He's somewhere in Edom or somewhere east of Israel. So that's where these guys come from is significant and makes much more sense if he's not located in Israel, which nobody claimed he was. When Job's three friends heard of all the calamity that had befallen him, they came each from his place. Number one, Eliphaz. The name El, of course, is God. Eli, my God, Phaz, gold. Eliphaz, God is gold. God is fine gold. That's what the name means. Make of it what you will. The Temanite, and that town, it means literally Southlands, and maybe it's from Alabama. But that town is somewhere near Petra, Tema, and that's where he was from. And then Bildad, the Shuhite. Bildad is a name utterly untranslatable and unknown in the Bible. I have no idea what it means. But he's from Shu, which is a town along the Euphrates River, so we know where he came from. And Zophar, the third friend, his name means young dove. Now, that may not immediately be clear to us, but it is, if you know the Bible, they say you're as foolish as a little dove. And they were considered, young birds were considered the epitome of silliness. Twerping, just, what do they do? Twerp? What do birds do? Sheep? Whatever they do, they make noises, and they just have like little sparrows outside on my patio. That's what they do. They seem to have a lot to say without any meaning, of course. So they're considered silly. So to be called young dove is no compliment in the Bible. And he's a Namathite, and Naamah is a town in Judea. So he's the closest, actually, that would be in later Judean territory. So they come from all over the place. But not that far. They arranged to meet together to go and condole, to comfort Job. And their intentions are very good. When they saw him from afar, they could not recognize him, verse 12. And they raised their voices and wept. They care about it. Each tore his robe, as still a Jewish symbol of mourning. Each tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head in order to join Job in mourning. They're going to a Shiva, really. It's going to last 7 days. The Shiva is the mourning period the Jews follow after the death of a loved one. And you go and you visit the survivors and you bring them food. They're not supposed to do anything. And you are forbidden to initiate the conversation. The mourner has to, and then you respond in comforting words. We don't follow that today, as far as I know, but that's the tradition. And they sat with him. During Shiva, you sit down. You sit on the ground if you can, or on a low stool. A lot of people, again, don't do that anymore, but some people do. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. So this is a proto-Shiva, an ancient custom which led up to our custom. And no one said a word to him because you cannot initiate conversation with a mourner according to the Orthodox law. Is this the Jewish writer imposing Jewish religious details on an ancient pagan situation? No reason why not. But is it an accurate description of ancient pagan customs which later followed on into Judaism, which we took over? No reason why not, but we don't know in which direction it's going. Is it an anachronism or is it not? They sat with him 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word, for they saw that his anguish was very great. And so they're sitting together in mourning for 7 days. And of course, this points to either a pagan origin of the 7-day Shiva today, or a Jewish writer imposing a later Jewish custom back on a pagan story, because he really edited the heck out of this introduction. Now we're finished with the prologue, and it'll be 30 chapters until we get to the epilogue. 90% of this book is written by one hand. The style is consistent, the words are consistent. There's no reason to imagine. Now, the Bible is a compound work. I mean, it's not a book, it's a collection of books with scores, if not hundreds of authors. But this chunk looks like it has literary integrity. And this is the whatever the prologue and the epilogue may be, an old pagan fragment, heavily overworked over by a Jewish editor, or maybe he wrote it himself since it has the Jewish name for God and all that, I wonder. But this is certainly these 30 chapters dropped in here in the middle between the prologue and the epilogue. This is the work of one Jewish author. And if you say 300 BC, it wouldn't be too wrong. He is very Jewish. And we may be part of a Hellenistic period. But these vexed issues of justice, is God just? Is any man just? Maybe the big question is the question the justice of God or the justice of human beings? Both are up for grabs. They both might be assumptions. The Jews had always said, we'll question the justice of human beings before we would dare question the justice of God. In our agony and torment, at least we have the idea that God is our God and loves us and is with us even in this terrible suffering, although he does not choose to alleviate it for the time being. Bismano, in his time, he will take us on to something better. Remember Elie Wiesel, as a teenager, Orthodox teenager, raised on nothing but Talmud and Torah, and in the world we can't even imagine of Eastern European ultra-Orthodox Jews. God was everything to them. And he's torn out of that and thrown in Auschwitz. He sees his mother and sister die, ultimately his father. And he became the great spokesman of those folks. And the line I keep remembering from Night, his horrifying memoir, but which every Jew should read. We have an obligation to those people, not to forget, but remembering is so terrible. He wrote, he saw on Yom Kippur, people who were starving refused to eat anything, even the soup, the slop they were given. He couldn't believe it. And then he saw a minyan, about 30 fellows, huddling together, murmuring the Yom Kippur prayers, which of course the Orthodox Jews of Eastern Europe knew by heart. And he looked, and first of all, he said, how can they do that? And then he says, but despite myself, a prayer rose in my heart to the God in whom I no longer believed. The relationship with God is a love relationship. And sometimes you feel you hate the one you love best. You fight most fiercely with them. They're the ones closest to you. I mean, you're not going to fight with a person 20 miles away. And we feel hatred and resentment toward people in our own family that we don't feel for Hitler. Our hatred for Hitler is very abstract. I never met the guy. Most evil man in the world. I never met him. But I met Uncle Jake. And when he said that thing to me that was so cruel in front of the whole family and humiliated me, I hate that guy. Do I? Or even more complicated, the person in your life that you love most. There are things you can't stand. But at least Martin Buber said, when we love the person, we love the whole person. And it takes the whole of us to love the whole person. We are engaged to, but when we hate, we don't hate the whole person. We hate something about the person. And we love them anyway. And only a little, if we're psychologically, quote, normal, unquote, not all of us, not all of our being is engaged in hate. A little part of us hates a little part of the other. I hope Buber's right. But all right, that's we love, very complicated thing, and hate is not its opposite, it's the other side of the coin. All right, chapter 3, we're now into the body of the book. I guess some of you never thought we'd get there, but here we are. Chapter 3, verse 1. After this, Acharei hadavarim ha'ela. That is so common in the Bible. After these things, it means. Acharei, after, hadavarim, these things or these words. Again, it can mean two different things. Ha'ele, these. After these things, it's a reference to everything that's come before. And this is stuck into an earlier story, then he's trying to knit it together. That's his little stitch to knit it together with the prologue. After these things, after the 7 days of silent Shiva, mourning, Eob opened his mouth. Now that's a beginning. It doesn't have to say that. It could just say Job said. Job opened his mouth. The beginning of the great Sermon on the Mount of Jesus. And he's, of course, obviously a Jewish prophetic tradition. It says Jesus opened his mouth and said these things. Beginning of the 10 Commandments. God said all these things saying. A little repetitive, but that's the formal entry. After this, Job opened his mouth. So now we're waiting. What's going to happen? And cursed his day. Literally says, Yomo, his day. What day? The day that he was speaking? Well, we don't know from the sentence, but all we have to do is look at verse 3. Damn the day I was born. He's cursing his birthday, the day of his birth. I wish I were never born. And Job spoke out and said, damn the day I was born, the night that said a boy is begotten. Against a life so embittered, he wishes he'd never been born. That would be better than what he's got now. This is an echo of Jeremiah, who said, Jeremiah, you want to note it down, chapter 20, verse 14 through 18. Cursed be the day I was born. Now he was preaching to Israel to repent. No one listened to him. There was a plot by priests to kill him. And that was foiled by, still, he was execrated. Everybody hated him because he was telling them Jerusalem was doomed, which it was, but nobody wanted to hear that. So he was an outcast among his own people because he said what he knew was true and what God told him to say. Cursed be the day I was born, the day my mother bore me. Let it not be blessed. Now, surely the author of Job, of this section in 300 BC, knew the words of Jeremiah of 300 years earlier. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, saying, he chooses to curse the man who brought the news. What he means is, I wish I were never born. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, saying, a son, a male is born to you, making him very glad. Let that man be like the cities the Lord destroyed unrelenting. Let him hear a cry in the morning, an alarm at noontime, because he slew me not in the womb. He should have killed me while I was still in the womb, that my mother might be my tomb, her womb ever pregnant, never giving forth. Why did I emerge from the womb to see only trouble and toil and spend my days in shame? Whew. That's Jeremiah, and it certainly is inspiration for this. Damn the day, back to Job, chapter 3, verse 3. Damn the day I was born, the night that said a boy is begotten. He's blaming the actual night as if it's the fault of the night. He was apparently, was he born at sundown? And he, just as the day was going down and then the night, he emerges at night? I don't know. That day, let it be darkness. God above, ignore it. No light break upon it. Darkness and gloom claim it. Light versus dark. Ever read the Gospel of John? I was teaching the Gospel of John when this plague interrupted me at St. Stephen's Church. Very interesting. Light versus dark. Constantly. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the light shone in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Dark, bad, light, good. Every religion lights candles in the modern world, oil in the old world. I knew a psychoanalyst who wanted to be authentic. He got an enormous ancient menorah and he poured oil into it and lit the oil, and the whole thing exploded and ruined the ceiling. Got to be very careful about that. But now it's candles. Of course, we light candles, and Hanukkah especially, the darkest time of the year, we light the menorah, and the Christians light the Christmas tree. Think of it, the menorah, Hanukkah and Christmas have nothing in common thematically. Passover and Easter have a lot in common. But the common symbol, the popular symbol, the menorah, which is obviously an abstract tree, and the Christmas tree, which is a tree. So you have the burning tree, the flaming tree. In the midst of the darkness of winter, as the days are getting shorter and shorter, cavemen said, oh my God, the sun's going out. Oh my gods, the sun's going out. We've got to encourage the sun to come back. So they would lit bonfires. They throw trees in a pile and light bonfires, sympathetic magic. You see, gods of light, this is what we want you to do. Do in the heaven what we do here. Make a big light, make the sun come back. And it worked every time. And the days began getting longer. So at Christmas and Hanukkah, the darkest time of the year, we light symbolic trees. So God will get the idea. Well, we don't think of it about that now, but that's the origin. And the curious detail that although the themes of Christmas and Hanukkah are so different, the symbol is the same. The tree of light. So he's saying darkness is bad, and you forget in the dark, you can't see. That's not always true, you know. You can see farther in the dark. You see the stars in the dark. You can't see them during the day. And in order to see the truth, Jacob had to flee from his brother Esau, whom he had cheated twice, and his father, whom he had lied to. And he goes out into the desert and into one of those dark nights, so dark that you can't see your hand in front of your face. I've been out in the desert in such a time. And he lies down and he has a vision of the stairway with the angels going up and down, and God here and man here, and the connectedness between the divine and the human. And he wakes up and he says, the Lord was in this place all the time, and I didn't notice. Now I know the earth is filled with God, and I've got to change my ways. And he learns about he begins working on his relationship with God. So he saw more at night than during the day. In James Joyce's great book, Ulysses, there is a chapter in which Stephen Dedalus is walking on the beach at Kingstown in Ireland, where I've been. I've done the James Joyce tour of the whole place. I was a great devotee at the time. We had the James Joyce Society. And as he walks along with his eyes closed, the Proteus chapter, he says, Joyce writes, close your eyes and see. Shut your eyes and see. We sometimes see more when we look within. So the darkness light thing is not consistent, but here the dark is bad and the light is good. Darkness and gloom claim, verse 5. Clouds settle over it. Eclipse, terrify it. Eclipses were seen. The blotting out of the sun during the day was considered something that was done by the primeval god of chaos, Tiamat, who is the god of the sea. But this dragon figure, she'd be responsible for gobbling up the sun and terrifying people. Eclipse, terrify it, terrify the day. Night, gloom, seize it, the day in which I was born. Gobble it up, include it not in the days of the year, wipe it out in the roll of the months, let it not enter, remove it from the calendar. Yea, that night be sterile, infertile. If it were infertile, then I couldn't have been born. Let no joyful sound come in. And where am I? I don't want to miss anything. Let no joyful sound come in. The joy of saying, you've got a new baby, mazel tov. No, nothing. Let the sea cursors damn it. We're getting again to the sea monsters. Those skilled to stir Leviathan, the primeval monster that was in the sea in the beginning, mentioned in creation. And a dragon figure. A primeval dragon is very common in ancient literature. You have it in Gilgamesh. He steals the secret of eternal life. You have it in the Garden of Eden, the snake or dragon who steals eternal life from humanity. And later on, I'm not going to talk that much about Leviathan now, because later on, it'll be discussed in great detail. There's a whole chapter about God's creating Leviathan, and you'll meet that primeval dragon, a very exciting figure in ancient Middle Eastern mythology. Verse 9, its twilight stars, may they be darkened. Let it seek light in vain, nor see the eyes of dawn. I'll just finish this and then we'll break. So let that night, it's a long poem saying the same thing over and over again. Since it closed not the womb's doors, that day, if it were doing its job, would have closed my mother's womb. It's all metaphor. I mean, a day can't do that, but the day of my birth is cursed because it didn't keep my mother from delivering. To hide trouble from my eyes. My life has been nothing but trouble. I should never have been born. Why did I not die at birth? Emerge from the womb and expire. Like a stillbirth, would I were hidden, like babes that never saw light. Those are terrible words, terrible. Imagine his agony to say things like this. Why did knees receive me? Now, the old tradition among the Romans may very well have been something they got from earlier civilizations, which is very common of them, that when the mother gives birth, the baby is placed upon the knees of the father, and he decides whether the baby will live or die. That they're put upon his knees. So I think he's referring to that. Why did knees receive me? Why did my father approve my birth? Or breasts give me suck? Why did my mother keep me alive? For now I would be lying quiet. I would be asleep and at rest. I wish I were dead. That's the point. Now, I'm going to stop here because it's a little past our time of 8:45. And next time, I'm going to pick up his description of death, of what the kingdom of death is like, and compare it to Enkidu's dream of death in the Gilgamesh epic, which is, well, first parts of it were 2000 BC. The version we have now is 1800 BCE. It's very old. This is a common view of death. Read ahead, and you'll see how they viewed death. And look up the poem Ozymandias by Shelley and see what he has to say about it. Death, the kingdom of death, was hardly a developed idea for the Hebrews because they were so ethical in their thinking that if you have heaven and hell and bad people go to hell and good people go to heaven, that's one thing. But if in death everyone's the same and there's no moral distinction, then the life after death would have no real interest to the Israelites. And it really didn't. But when they did talk about it, this is how they talked about it. And it's very interesting to see how what their idea is virtually identical to the ancient Greek idea. Joe, were there any questions posted?
There were a couple of observations, but Ellen asks, what's the meaning of Lucifer as it pertains to Hasatan?
Lucifer grows out of this, the bearer of light. He was not only in Christian mythology, he was not only an angel, but the most glorious. But he said, if you look at Paradise Lost, Milton's great work, I would better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. And he rebelled against God and took a third of the angels with him. And the archangel, Michael, which means Michael, who is like unto God, drove him out of heaven. And if you go to St. Michael's Church, 10 minutes walk from where I'm sitting, a glorious church that's seen bombardment and chaos and everything since the 18th century, and an iconic building in Charleston. Behind the altar is a glorious stained glass window. It may be Tiffany, I don't know, of Michael destroying the dragon. So Satan was identified with that primeval dragon from earlier mythology. And Lucifer, off too. This is Christian mythology in that stained glass window. So the devil is seen as the result, the origin is the same. The Hasatan, the cosmic opponent, loses loses the definite article and simply becomes Satan or Satan, a person who appears, well, it never appears that I know of in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, without the definite article. But then in the New Testament does appear so as a definite personality, especially in the Gospel of Luke, where he's responsible for certain things happening, whereas he isn't in the other Gospels. But the Pharisees, who were the proto-rabbinic movement, and Jesus, who may have been a left-wing Pharisee, but he's certainly with them arguing things, and you only argue with people who are close to you, they believed in Satan and his demons. Those 1/3 of the angels whom the archangel Michael threw out of heaven became demons. And Satan and his demons were driven to the uttermost parts of the universe, that is hell, and they have been trying to mess up God's plan ever since. And that's where you get the tradition in Christianity that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was really Satan. It doesn't say anything like that in the original text, but that is an imposition of later mythology on an earlier mythology. And of course, you do have a dragon figure there, the serpent. So it certainly lends itself to that interpretation. So the personification of evil is Satan, and he begins with Leviathan, the writhing dragon of chaos, or Tiamat, even before that, Tiamat in the Enuma Elish story, this ancient Babylonian story, which may also go back to 2000 BC. in which you have the hero who destroys the angel or the dragon of chaos. Marduk versus Tiamat. Again, light versus darkness, the sun god, Marduk. And Tiamat, the writhing dragon of watery chaos. And she has to be destroyed, and she's cut up, and the world is made out of her. But that's another story. The Enuma myth and the Gilgamesh epic, you should read them. They're just wonderfully entertaining, and they will introduce you to all the richness of pagan mythology and all the different characters. But they show up in the Bible. There are psalms and references. I'll bring them in next week. I have them here. I'm going to take the time of giving God credit for creating the world by destroying a dragon and cutting it up. Well, Marduk is the one who did that. But the ancient prophets took it on and said, well, I guess since Marduk doesn't exist and only our God exists, then our God must have done it. So they give the Hebrew God credit for creating the world by smashing up a dragon, but that's not the Garden of Eden story or the 6 day story, except in the 6 day story, it says, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. Let me see. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God created God, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heaven and the earth. The haaretz hayata tohu v'vohu, and the earth was formless and chaotic. The choshech, with darkness, al panei tahom. Darkness, look at that darkness again. And God says, let there be light. Darkness bad, light good. And he creates the world by saying, let there be light. But tahom is the Hebrew equivalent of Tiamat. Tiamat was the female, naturally the goddess of chaos is female, not because men write it. They bring chaos into our lives. A man's life is very serene until she walks in. And oh my God, you get and it's her fault. It's not your own desires. Her, that temptress. So Tiamat is the ultimate woman deceiver. These goddesses of chaos are frequently female, not always, but frequently. And so Tiamat, who is destroyed by Marduk in the Enuma Elish, appears in the Bible story, which in its final form is more than 1,000 years later. And what you have is, it's depersonified. Choshek al panei tahom, darkness over the face of tahom, the watery abyss, the primeval sea of chaos. This isn't just the ocean. This is the primeval sea of chaos. And God says, let there be light, and the darkness evaporates. And there is no fight with tahom, because first of all, it's depersonalized in a monotheistic text. You can't have a goddess. And secondly, everything obeys God, except man in the Bible, where every aspect pleases and only man is vile. All of the world is obedient to God. The puppies do what they're supposed to do, the pussycats, the plants and the flowers. We don't. We are God's biggest problem. And strangely enough, we're his biggest aggravation, but we're also his biggest comforters. Who is there to comfort God but us? And we are exactly the ones who give him, I use the Yiddish term, tsuris. And now we pat him on the head, say, well, it's not so bad. Well, and what did he say? Well, and now we're talking about the suffering of God brought about by us, not the suffering of man brought about by God. You can do it two ways. All right, so that Lucifer is an outgrowth of Satan, an outgrowth of Hasatan, the opponent in the scriptures of the Hebrews, and which is a development of the idea of the dragon of watery, chaotic, the primeval chaos. Any other questions?
Does anybody have any other questions? You can unmute yourself. If so,
Michael, are you going to come next weekend to the synagogue?
To do what?
You don't read your emails from the synagogue. Shame on you.
And I belong to 6 synagogues. And I have to read all their, what is this? First of all, no, I'm not leaving this place. This virus is still abroad. I have no immune system. And considering that and my age, it would be folly for me to go to any meetings of any kind. Not for the time being.
We're coming in one at a time.
Having services there?
We're coming in one at a time. We're coming in one at a time to approach the open ark and say prayers from your heart for 20 minutes.
For it, but then suppose you have to go to the men's room. There are problems, there are complications here I am not willing to undertake, although I would love more than just about anything to go there. I think I have to put this off.
Okay.
Anything related to the class? Okay, folks.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doc.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr. Kogan.
Thank you, Michael.
Without which none of this could be done. Thanks, Joe. On behalf-
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Doc.
you all. I can't see all of you, but I can see some.
Can't see me.
Yes.
Not yet.
Ah, Mr. Herbert. You haven't aged a day, John.
Yeah, just my forehead.
Bye, everyone. Have a great week.
So long.
Hi,
Bye.
everybody have a great week.